As the dark clouds of the Second World War began to dissipate over Europe in 1945, a new chapter of uncertainty emerged, one not of military confrontation, but of a relentless pursuit of hidden wealth, specifically the elusive Nazi gold. This wealth, amassed through theft, looting, and the harsh imposition of forced labor, represented not only material treasure, but also a labyrinthine web of moral reckoning, as the world grappled with the aftermath of a brutal regime. The tactics of the Allied forces had shifted from engaging in direct conflict to employing intelligence, espionage, and interrogation in a quest that would stretch far beyond the borders of Germany. The gold, both a symbol of the Reich's treachery and a potential boon to a devastated Europe, lay buried beneath the rubble of shattered nations, deeply interwoven into the fabric of a post-war reconstruction that was as complex as the war itself. As the Allied armies advanced, they quickly recognized that the remnants of Nazi Germany included not only a defeat on the battlefield, but also the prospect of recovering vast sums of stolen wealth. Estimates suggested that the Nazis had hoarded gold reserves amounting to over 500 tons, gold which had been pilfered from conquered territories, including occupied countries like Poland, Czechoslovakia, and the Netherlands. The question loomed large: where did this treasure vanish after the fall of the Third Reich? Military strategists had to immediately pivot towards not just victory over the Wehrmacht, but also the identification and recovery of these assets, which could potentially aid in the reconstruction of war-torn Europe, or conversely, fuel further conflict. In the chaotic aftermath of the war, several expeditions were launched to uncover these hidden caches. American GIs, under the direction of the Office of Strategic Services, OSS, the precursor to the CIA, were instructed to sift through reports of vast subterranean vaults and fortified bunkers. A trove of intelligence gathered from defectors, interrogated officials, and local informants pointed towards locations across Europe, including Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. But collecting actionable intel would prove to be as complicated as the military campaigns that had come before. Mistrust among the populations, the fear of retribution, and the sheer scale of devastation made any concerted recovery operation exceedingly difficult. As investigative units scoured through the urban ruins, questions surrounding command decisions emerged. Should military leaders dedicate precious manpower and resources to unearth gold when humanitarian crises burgeoned? For some, the answer was simple. The gold could act as a financial lifeline for nations struggling under the weight of post-war reparations and economic instability. Others feared that the temptation of wealth could corrupt the very ideals of democracy and justice they sought to install. Hence, the pursuit of Nazi gold became entwined in broader debates about morality and governance versus the practicalities of power. The human aspect of this treasure hunt also revealed a poignant dilemma. Many of those seeking the gold suffered from the trauma of war, bearing psychological scars that would not easily heal. Stories emerged of soldiers who, upon reaching the remnants of bombed-out cities, were haunted by what they encountered. Remnants of lives forever altered, homes reduced to ash, families torn apart. These soldiers, while engaged in the occupation of Germany, could not help but wonder, how could a society that once espoused such grand ideals descend into greed and barbarism? The dissonance between wartime ideology and the hunger for wealth became a sobering reality for many, leading some soldiers to conclude that the search for gold, while important, was a deeply flawed venture. Among those leading the charge was Colonel Frank W. Whelan, an OSS officer whose sharp intellect and tactical prowess were instrumental in piecing together the Nazi treasure puzzle. Whelan employed an array of covert operations, blending military precision with investigative sleuthing. His teams operated under the assumption that some of the gold had been meticulously catalogued and hidden within well-guarded vaults, while other caches were buried hastily in the dead of night as the Nazi regime crumbled. This perspective led to the development of various strategies, including employing local anti-Nazi partisans to gather intelligence and coordinate operations. The complexities of this approach revealed a duality. Local informants provided valuable insights while also risking their lives for a cause that, to some, felt futile in light of their own suffering during the war. The advent of Operation Safe Haven in 1946 further escalated the hunt for Nazi gold. This initiative aimed to prevent the illegal transfer of wealth from Germany and reinforce the Allies' hold over the defeated nation. The United States, Britain, and other nations signed agreements to increase scrutiny over the financial activities of former Nazi officials. But the execution of such operations proved difficult. The sheer volume of intelligence and the network of underground conduits made tracking the movement of gold arduous. Moreover, several key Nazi figures had escaped, fleeing to places like Argentina and Brazil, where informal networks facilitated the concealment of their wealth. As the hunt progressed, stories of buried gold began to appear throughout Europe, igniting a frenzy among treasure hunters, some of whom were former soldiers turned mercenaries. They descended upon rural areas in Germany and Austria, equipped with metal detectors, shovels, and limitless determination. Rumors were rampant of hidden vaults located in underground bunkers, with several attempted digs resulting in little more than disillusionment and sour finds. Yet, the tales endured, and decades later, these stories would often resurface, underscoring a collective desire to recover what had been lost, both wealth and moral dignity. Despite relatively modest successes, the identification of several gold caches hidden within banks and private homes, most of the Nazi treasure remained elusive. Yet the pursuit had ignited profound discussions about justice, reparation, and the responsibility of nations to reclaim stolen wealth on behalf of their citizens. While military leaders grappled with the logistics of engaging in search operations, lawmakers pondered the implications of the findings. What would become of the gold? Would it be returned to its rightful owners? Or would it serve as a tool to rebuild nations ravaged by war? In the meantime, as each new piece of evidence emerged, the net of recovery extended into newly established agencies and international coalitions, including the newly formed United Nations, all wary of the implications of power and wealth distribution in a fragile geopolitical landscape. The blend of intelligence gathering, military strategy, and moral philosophy culminated in a rare moment in history, an inquiry not only into what had happened to the gold, but what had transpired within the human soul and the ideals of civilization itself during one of the darkest periods in history. As the legacy of the war continued to evolve, the unresolved fate of Nazi gold served as an eternal reminder of the moral complexities that transcended monetary value, overshadowed by the pressing realities of human suffering and the scars left behind by the Third Reich. The quest for the lost treasure of the Reich persists as both a historical intrigue and a resonance of moral inquiry, prompting each generation to evaluate the very essence of justice, responsibility, and the intricate relationship between wealth and the human condition. As World War II drew to a close, the landscape of Europe was marked not only by its physical destruction, but also by the psychological aftermath of a conflict fueled by both ideology and greed. The post-war hunt for Nazi gold became as much a pursuit of justice as a quest for recouping lost treasure. The Allied powers were faced with an unprecedented challenge, not only to dismantle the remnants of the Nazi regime, but also to identify, recover, and make sense of the staggering wealth that was hidden across the continent. Reports of stolen gold, jewelry, art, and currency flooded in from liberated territories, instigating an urgent response from military leaders and diplomats alike. The first step required the establishment of specialized units, such as the Monuments, Fine Arts, and Archives Program, MFAA, which employed the expertise of art historians and curators in conjunction with military personnel to track down and document plundered works. Yet the search for gold specifically presented unique and daunting challenges, often exacerbated by the chaos of post-war Europe. The Allies found themselves navigating a rapidly changing landscape of enemy territory and returning governmental authority, bringing to light a web of hidden assets scattered in safe houses, abandoned bunkers, and local banks. One of the first strategic decisions was to prioritize intelligence gathering. Photos, maps, and rumors became pivotal in piecing together a picture of where treasures might be buried. Tactics included forming partnerships with local populations, some of whom had suffered under Nazi rule, and were eager to assist in the recovery efforts, while others, driven by opportunism, sought to capitalize on the chaotic environment. Military officials often employed psychological operations, leveraging the promise of reward or a share of the recovery to stir local cooperation. Yet the reliability of information frequently fluctuated, complicating search operations. As various teams scoured the hillsides and city streets of Germany, it became apparent that many caches had been moved, melted down, or disguised in deeply layered social networks. Tales of extraordinary lengths taken to conceal wealth, gold bars buried beneath floors, art imprinted on the walls of family homes, painted a picture of a society consumed by fear and loyalty to the regime. However, the logistical nightmare remained ever present. For every successful dig that unveiled wedges of ill-gotten gold, a dozen more yielded empty promises and disappointment. This investigation extended beyond the battlefield and into the realm of ideology, as the Allies grappled with ethical questions surrounding possession and reparation. The consistent diversion of recovered assets into the rebuilding of war-torn nations ignited fierce debates about reparations owed to survivors and victimized communities, asking the contentious question, was looted wealth a means to restore economic stability, or a reminder of a fractured moral compass? In many instances, the very soldiers tasked with recovery were deeply affected by the remnants they encountered. Photographs of emaciated survivors juxtaposed against piles of treasure brought forth an agonizing acknowledgement of the horrors inflicted upon humanity. The faces of displaced families haunted those undertaking the search, each piece of recovered wealth accruing significant weight as it echoed the thousands of lives lost and destroyed. A sense of responsibility loomed large, transforming the hunt into a mission marked by introspection, one that had to confront the raw emotion entwined with collective memory. For soldiers, intelligence officers, and historians alike, the journey became a stark reminder of their own humanity, especially as they worked to balance the ethical dilemma of who rightfully deserved the wealth. Across Europe, significant caches of gold were discovered, revealing the underlying infrastructure that had remained hidden throughout the war. In 1945, an extraordinarily rare discovery was made in the remnants of the Reichsbank in Berlin, where piles of currency and gold bars both glittered and threatened to strip the sense of morality from the ongoing restoration. Commanders often debated whether to focus exclusively on gold coins and bullion, or to broaden their pursuits to encompass fine art and other forms of wealth that carried historical significance. As military planners scrambled to stay ahead of potential counter-revolutionary actions by ex-Nazi sympathizers hoping to keep their spoils, the tactical response became increasingly complex. The logistics of transport grew more problematic, and there was little opportunity for oversight or organization. Caches were often piled haphazardly into military vehicles without precise accounting, complicating the potential for equitable distribution. The priority, however, was often the immediate needs of the region: food, shelter, and stabilization, rather than a meticulous return of wealth. There grew an inherent risk that the pursuit of gold and valuable possessions could overshadow the morally essential work of healing a broken continent. Yet by the summer of 1946, some degree of order began to emerge, bolstered by formal international agreements and the establishment of reparations committees. As layers of bureaucracy unfolded, the stories of lost gold continued to weave intermingling narratives, settling into the public consciousness. Media outlets depicted the ongoing hunt for Nazi treasurers as both a gripping tale of detective work and moral reckoning. Popularized accounts ignited the imaginations of the populace, documenting not only the treasure's tangible value, but integrating narratives of hope, disappointment, and sometimes farcical adventure, where treasure hunters became folk heroes. Their tales inspired some to join the search or conduct independent excavations, inciting a wave of amateur treasure hunting across former Nazi territories. Yet beyond the romanticism of the chase, the increasing awareness of dislocation rooted in these stories prompted a collective introspection on the deeper implications of possession and morality. The question of what constituted rightful ownership remained unresolved, further hampered by ongoing hostilities and distrust in a Europe still reeling from the war's violence. Competing claims and the nostalgia for a war long past held the world in an uneasy balance. As time pressed on, the concept of collective restitution elevated the cries for justice from those seeking a recovery of dignity alongside their lost wealth. The legacy of the search for Nazi gold continues to loom large, reflecting a melange of human aspiration, ethical quandary, and a determination to reconcile thievery with the quest for a just future. Each episode of Discovery brought with it not merely a broader vision of wealth, but also a broader question of humanity's capacity for restoration in the face of the stark moral dilemmas left in the wake of war. In pursuing the lost treasures of the Third Reich, nations scoured their souls, prompting every generation to reassess the degree to which they could or should atone for the sins of their pasts, resulting in profound conversations about the responsibilities of wealth in shaping a just and equitable world. In a world still recovering from the echoes of conflict, we invite you to engage in this ongoing dialogue. Share your thoughts and reflections in the comments below, and subscribe for more explorations into the complex legacies of war as we unravel the tapestry of humanity's experiences during one of the darkest periods in history. Your voice matters in this vital conversation. In the aftermath of World War II, the specter of lost Nazi gold haunted not only the treasure seekers, but also the nations that had suffered under the weight of the Third Reich. When the Wehrmacht surrendered in May 1945, millions of dollars worth of gold, jewels, art, and other valuables were believed to have been hidden or hoarded by the Nazis. This wealth was a poignant symbol of the atrocities committed during the war. Its recovery became a task fraught with complexity, politically, logistically, and ethically. The understanding of Nazi gold manifested in myriad ways. Some saw it as a means of economic recovery for war-torn nations, while others viewed it as tainted wealth, ill-gotten gains representative of genocide and oppression. The Allied nations began extensive investigations to trace the fate of this treasure. The establishment of the Gold Reporting Section within the Allied occupation forces was deemed essential to monitor and manage any findings related to Nazi financial artifacts. However, successes were sporadic and oftentimes disheartening. As the investigation progressed, it became clear that the disbandment of the Nazi Party and its economic systems left behind a labyrinth of clues that seemed to lead nowhere. The strategic decisions made by Adolf Hitler and his regime during the war, particularly as Germany began to lose ground, had set the stage for post-war chaos. Orders were issued to move vast reserves of wealth into buried caches, supposedly hidden across Europe, with areas near the Bavarian Alps, specifically in the vicinity of Berchtesgaden, one of Hitler's favorite retreats, often cited as prime locations for potential discoveries. Hitler's foreknowledge of impending defeat led him to prepare a series of robust defensive strategies, not only for military fronts, but also for safeguarding assets from advancing Allied forces. The subtle implication of security transported this treasure into the realm of a ghost story, attracting hunters drawn to both legend and potential profit. Amidst this disarray, military intelligence units were actively scouring the remnants of the Nazi regime, utilizing aerial reconnaissance and ground searches to locate deposits. It became apparent that the treasure was often stored in increasingly clever methods, camouflaged in remote locales, or deposited within secret compartments of dilapidated structures. However, in the wake of the war, the very landscape of Europe was rapidly changing. The drawing of borders and the imposition of new political regimes made even these searches fraught with danger as rival factions emerged, motivated by differing ideologies and historical grievances. For many treasure hunters, the quest for Nazi gold was not merely about wealth. It was also about the resurrection of national pride, far removed from the terror that once ruled. One of the primary logistical challenges faced by the Allied forces was the sheer volume of land to be covered. They attempted to coordinate with displaced persons, local citizens, and even former German military personnel who might provide leads on missing caches. However, the closer they seemingly got to unearthing a trove of gold, the greater the frustrations became. The population in many regions was grappling with their own dislocation, their own survival taking precedence over the questionable legacy of Nazi wealth. This led to conflicts between treasure hunters and locals, creating an atmosphere that was both tense and sometimes violent. On a broader tactical level, the Allied occupation policy sought to dismantle not just the physical remnants of the Nazis, but also the ideology that had allowed such tyranny to exist. Each discovery or hint of treasure reverberated with the moral implications of retrieving wealth amassed through exploitation. It complicated any simple narrative of reclaiming lost items, demanding a deeper examination of the societal contracts that emerged in times of war. For many, the idea of recovering treasure that may have belonged to victims of the Holocaust sparked discussions about moral imperatives and historical accountability. As these complex dynamics unfolded, individual stories began to emerge that showcased the intense human element behind the hunt. Hermann Göring, the infamous Nazi leader, had allegedly buried vast sums near a remote farmhouse in Bavaria. Several local farmers became entangled in the search, fueled by greed and hope for a better future. Stories circulated of men with shovels who became overnight legends at local taverns, pitting their fortunes against perilous time constraints and burgeoning tensions within a divided Europe. Unbeknownst to many, these very sites would transform from mere holes in the ground to memorials of human ambition, conflict, and moral questioning. Simultaneously, intelligence groups like the United States OSS, Office of Strategic Services, transitioned into a new investigative mold under the auspices of an ongoing Cold War paranoia, as the hunt for Nazi gold became intertwined with concerns of Soviet expansionism in Europe. Reports of gold transfers to Soviet hands led to accusations, further complicating an already tangled web of international relations. In efforts to seize any opportunity for undermining communist narratives, Western allies turned their attention to hidden wealth, hoping to corner any perceived advantage endowed through the mishandling of potential post-war financing. As these multifaceted challenges oscillated within the treasure-hunting narrative, many would come to accept that what they sought went far beyond the accumulation of wealth. The revelations born from excavations often unearthed not merely material possessions, but also the grim histories of those who had been wronged. Forgotten artifacts became graphic reminders of a world marred by extremes of wealth and destitution, with displaced populations left pondering their identities amid an echo of past horrors. The search for Nazi gold unknowingly evolved into an examination of humanity's inner conflicts, moral imperatives, and the overarching question: how does one define not just the treasure, but the cost of what it means to possess it? In the end, the hunt for Nazi gold was not solely about recovery. Rather, it served as a pilgrimage towards understanding the scars of World War II that ran far deeper than one nation's pursuit of material gain. This intricate tapestry of ethical inquiries and human stories continues to inspire and elicit introspection, encapsulating a pivotal moment in history that speaks volumes about the ongoing effects of war, loss, and the search for reconciliation amid the ashes of conflict. As excavation teams painstakingly dug through earth once marked by violence, they unearthed not just gold, but also a clearer understanding of humanity's shared history, a treasure in its own right. Thus, the narrative of the lost treasure of the Reich remains deeply intertwined with the legacy of the war and a continuously evolving discourse on the moral responsibilities that accompany wealth, legacy, and humanity's quest for redemption in a fractured world. As the conflicts of World War II drew to a close, the ramifications of the Nazi regime extended well beyond the immediate devastation wrought upon Europe. The relentless pursuit of the Nazi gold, treasures amassed from war plunder, extortion, and the theft of Jewish property, came to symbolize a broader effort to reclaim a measure of justice in a world shattered by totalitarian oppression. Following the collapse of Germany in May 1945, Allied forces quickly recognized the crucial need to address not only the remnants of military strategy and command structures, but also the vast wealth that had been systematically appropriated from countless victims. This entailed meticulous and strategic planning in the form of treasure hunts and investigations aimed at revealing the locations of missing assets, with several nations involved taking initiative to claim their perceived fair share of what had been lost. In the immediate aftermath of the war, occupying powers commenced operations that were not solely focused on disarming German forces or rebuilding war-torn countries. They also sought to trace and consolidate Nazi assets. Under the auspices of the Allied Control Council in Berlin, former members of the regime were interrogated regarding the whereabouts of missing gold, artwork, and currency. The challenges were multifold. Misinformation ran rampant as former officials, driven by desperation or false bravado, misled investigators, leading many cases down false trails. As a result, the hunt was often mired in an environment of conflicting interests, making it difficult to establish reality from fiction. Various secret caches, entire vaults, and the potential for hidden caches in the rubble of bombed-out towns contributed to an era that resembled a treasure hunt, albeit one fraught with the ghosts of suffering in its wake. Although unearthing Nazi gold transcended the realm of mere financial gain, it became an exercise in the analysis of human morality and historical accountability. There emerged a deep ethical dilemma that haunted the missions conducted by Allied forces. Should the spoils of plundered wealth be returned to victims, or were they to be used to fund the reconstruction of European nations devastated by war? Advocates for restitution argued that returning stolen treasures was a moral imperative, an act that could heal collective wounds inflicted upon communities. However, skeptics questioned how feasible this was given the sheer scale of the wartime atrocities and the economic instability that followed the conflict. The debate highlighted the complex nexus between wealth, power, and a historical reckoning from which many nations were still grappling. The operational theater of this search for lost treasures unfolded across Europe, especially in countries like Austria, Switzerland, and Germany, often revealing the layered intricacies of military strategy employed to either secure or liberate these assets. It was not merely a matter of a sweep operation or on-ground captures. Intelligence reports were meticulously assessed, and reconnaissance conducted over known Nazi strongholds. Nevertheless, the political maneuvering was as crucial as the military logistics, with various nations, including the United States, which had gained access to the enormous wealth located within the Reichsbank, embarking on specialized missions. The United States Army, notably through the offices of the Treasury Department, began forming units dubbed Gold Brigades, tasked with tracking Nazi gold reserves. Documents were seized, and testimonies were gathered to guide subsequent operations. In the depths of post-war devastation, the haunting specters of humanity's darkest hour were never far from view. The local communities, once vibrant and filled with life, were now often mere shadows, having been subjected to barbarism that stripped them of their loved ones. Studies show that in some circumstances, those who encountered the plight of the victims, whether they were military personnel, police units, or civilian volunteers, found themselves facing deep emotional and psychological scars derived from witnessing the aftermath of urban warfare, concentration camps, and mass graves. As these individuals sifted through the ash-laden debris of cities that had seemingly turned to war-ravaged wastelands, they grappled with a sense of disillusionment and a heavy moral burden that came with knowledge of what had transpired in the pursuit of wealth. Moreover, the tactical decisions were further compounded by threats not only from logistical challenges, but also from the very human cost of the hunt. The tensions among occupying forces frequently gave rise to confrontations. Acceptance of the spoils of war came with an understanding that rival camps would indeed operate under different ethical principles. In some instances, individual soldiers or officers chose to pocket valuable artifacts as the vast landscapes of Europe became the spoils of the war, a betrayal of the very ethics they had sworn to uphold. The inner turmoil of these individuals highlighted the incongruence of serving a noble cause, while simultaneously grappling with temptation, exposing human frailty in a time rife with justifications for greed. One of the most significant caches of gold, and arguably one of the most hotly pursued, was reported to be buried deep within the Austrian Alps, in a location that would become notorious in legend. Known as the Nazi gold train, this train purportedly contained not only gold bars, but also jewelry, artwork, and other valuables looted throughout the war. The tale of this treasure fueled a series of expeditions, with treasure hunters and military units seeking to unearth the vehicle cloaked under heavy earth, and discourse surrounding the likelihood of its existence. The search for the Nazi gold train became rooted in an enduring narrative of hope and desperation, a metaphor for humanity's quest not only for stolen riches, but for the restitution of dignity that war had obliterated. In this perilous blend of hope, greed, and moral ambiguity, the hunt for Nazi gold revealed the haunting legacy of the war, one that trails much further than financial outcomes. Each excavation, each treasure recovered, became a testimony to human suffering, resistance, and the continual struggle for redemption hidden behind the facade of material wealth. Allied forces found themselves navigating the fraught emotional landscape following the trauma of war, a haunting reminder of humanity's duality, where quests for justice intertwined with flecks of greed. As they revisited the stark memories left behind by destruction, they unearthed not just wealth, but also narratives deeply entwined with the history of a fractured world, and symbols that would serve as poignant reminders of not only what was lost, but also what remained to be reconciled. Thus, the chapter of lost treasures transformed into a broader quest for the essence of human dignity amid the shadows of war, a journey that would remain interminably intertwined with the lessons of history. As World War II drew its grim curtain, the very fabric of Europe lay decimated, both physically and emotionally, leaving a landscape teeming with countless narratives of human endeavor. Amid the ruins, the quest for the elusive Nazi gold became not merely a search for riches, but a complex interplay of ideology, military strategy, and humanity's struggle against a maelstrom of chaos and desperation. The mounting pressure of post-war reconstruction sparked a fervent urgency. The need to strengthen weakened economies and restore faith in governance bore heavily on the shoulders of Allied forces, who were simultaneously grappling with the monumental task of addressing the post-war legacy left by the Nazis. The gold that had been amassed to fuel Adolf Hitler's war machine represented both a curse and a beacon amid the rubble of decimated cities. The promise of wealth led many to pursue its shadows relentlessly. With the war's end, Allied command faced a daunting challenge: where to begin the eradication of Nazi influence, and subsequently, the retrieval of hidden treasures that could assist in rebuilding their continents. The continued search for hidden caches and loot became a pivotal extension of military operations on European soil, steeped in tense multinational cooperation, yet fractured by individual ambition and mistrust. The U.S. military spearheaded initial efforts supported by intelligence from various European resistance groups, whose members provided invaluable leads to suspicious locations rumored to harbor Nazi treasures. Information was often inconclusive and second-hand, relying on fragmented stories passed down through hushed tones of desperation or intrigue. The infamous Nazi gold train, hoarded within the snowy crevices of the Austrian Alps, offered a tantalizing prospect, steeped in folklore that hung heavily in the air of Europe. Tasked with the search were not only military units, but also civilian treasure hunters who, armed with shovels and unyielding determination, traversed rugged terrains, driven by dreams of newfound fortune. Yet, this pursuit was fraught with peril. The brutal mountain conditions were not the only enemies they faced. Local communities suffering from the ravages of conflict often eyed outsiders with wariness, wary of exploitation, or prone to jealousy of perceived fortune that they believed would never reach the hands of the impoverished. The human consequences of war echoed through these interactions, illustrating that the search for gold was also a search for healing, restitution, and perhaps a standby belief in a better future. Until this juncture, the precise methodology employed during these treasure-finding missions remained rudimentary at best, lacking advanced geolocation technologies that would soon emerge in later decades. Commanders would often send small platoons into potentially affected areas, armed with shovels and a series of maps riddled with notations from intelligence reports. These operations were speculative yet imbued with a sense of purpose. Each expedition crystallized a collective hope in a future untainted by the atrocities of the past. Yet the deeper they dug, the more complicated the narrative of their excavation became. The lines between right and wrong blurred as the shadows of ambition twisted the hands of otherwise well-intentioned servicemen. As each dig progressed and locals began to unravel tales of buried fortunes, tensions mounted, fostering rivalries not just among treasure seekers, but further exasperated the involvement of military units, who were hesitant to allow indiscriminate access to their strategic operations. Command was faced with a tactical dilemma: how to balance the operational tenets of military engagement while allowing civilian enthusiasm to fuel their pursuit. This struggle was emblematic of the greater fallout in Europe as society wrestled with the ghosts of a dark past, unwilling to let go of vengeance and unresolved grief, while inching toward a collaborative future. In their pursuit of wealth, a mirror was held up to the disarray, revealing not just the target of the hunt, but the fractured psyche of a continent desperately seeking closure. Moreover, amidst these efforts, the intricate realities of post-war geopolitical intrigue began to weave a more complex narrative. Nations carved from the ruins of conflict now found themselves navigating not only the financial ramifications of lost World War II assets, but also the subsequent ideological divisions emergent in the Cold War climate that loomed ominously overhead. Millions of funds vanished without a trace, with whispers of deals emerging in hushed circles within government buildings, overshadowed by accusations of corruption and bribery. Military officials grew wary, wanting to unite Europe under strong economies, but also realizing that the quest for gold could lead to a vacuum of power that past ties to Nazi beneficiaries might exploit. The meticulous planning of strategic operations by the Allied forces shifted focus from mere treasure hunting into broader endeavors aimed at dismantling Nazi infrastructure, ensuring that the very act of searching for gold never overshadowed the imperative to eliminate fascism from the continent. Each campaign became a case study in evolving strategy, as units devised plans built on newly acquired understanding of guerrilla tactics, augmenting their efforts to scout concealed caches with intelligence-driven assertiveness. In one notable operation conducted within the shadowy perspectives of the Swabian Jura, air reconnaissance provided critical information on isolated mining towns and potential stash locations. Rapidly, these methods evolved to blend precision, scrutiny, and determination, to snare not just few bars of gold, but critical narratives germinating deep within the psychological landscape of post-war Europe. Each recovery operation was a treasure trove etched with archetypal human dramas, soldiers negotiating between personal aspirations and the ideals of collective responsibility. As loot was uncovered and brought into stark daylight, it bore witness not only to Germany's authoritarian ambition, but also the stories of oppressed peoples, the real victims of such grand narratives. Consequently, with each clink of bars being counted, whispered stories of lost family heirlooms and the plundered memories of the oppressed could now rise to the surface, giving voice to the written and unwritten accounts hidden in the shadows of vaults. The hunt for the Nazi treasures became emblematic of a post-war Europe grappling with its identity amidst remnants of wealth derived from suffering, despair, and anguish. The emotional entanglement it carries serves as a breadcrumb trail leading through the murky waters of human history. As the treasure hunt stirs up the haunting memories buried beneath the snow of the alpine expanse, it embodies the relentless pursuit of a moral anchor, a search for meaning where wealth and dignity intertwine. While the physical gold may sustain the economies, it is the narratives surrounding its recovery, the stories of loss and resilience, that will resonate through generations, propelled not only by the gold's metallic shimmer, but by the fervent hope for restitution woven within the narratives of its retrieval. With this in mind, the quest continues, a testament to the intertwined legacies of dialogue, trust, and collaboration. Engage with us as we delve deeper into this enigmatic history. Subscribe for more explorations of untold stories in our shared past, and share your suggestions for new themes. Together, we can uncover the enduring lessons of history. In the immediate aftermath of World War II, the treasures amassed by the Nazis became not only a symbol of the regime's greed, but also a focal point for a fragmented Europe attempting to reconstruct itself. The Nazis had plundered vast amounts of wealth during their conquests, seizing precious metals, artworks, and cultural artifacts from occupied countries. This extensive looting, numbering in the billions of dollars, was meticulously executed, often utilizing the most advanced logistic frameworks of the time, which included the application of efficient transportation routes and storage strategies. As Allied forces advanced, they discovered not only the remnants of a devastated Europe, but also the eerie quiet of hidden treasures, concealed in vaults across the continent. With the war's end, recovering these treasures fell under the purview of various Allied organizations, who employed tactical methodologies reminiscent of military operations. Intelligence assessments indicated that the Nazi hierarchy had established several secretive caches, with one of the most famous being the so-called Nazi gold train, believed to be hidden in the Owl Mountains of Poland. Teams of soldiers were deployed, using intelligence reports garnered from former Nazi officials, captured documents, and local testimonies to form a comprehensive understanding of the treasure's possible locations. Dogs trained to sniff out gold were even utilized in certain initiatives, emphasizing the seriousness of the recovery operations. As the Allies prepared to embark on their treasure hunts, they faced significant logistical challenges, as well as political and ethical dilemmas. Countries like Poland and Czechoslovakia had suffered immensely under Nazi occupation, and the presence of Allied forces often stirred deep-seated resentments among locals. Many people were skeptical about the intentions behind treasure hunts. Were these expeditions merely an effort to find and secure funds for war reparations, or were they motivated by a genuine desire to rectify historical wrongs? This ambivalence accentuated the complexity of the situation, making recovery operations as much a matter of emotional sensitivity as it was about the search for lost assets. Amidst the pursuit of tangible treasures, the impact of these operations on the human spirit was profound. As Allied soldiers dug through mountains, caves, and abandoned bunkers, they were often met with the emotional wreckage left behind. Not merely the physical artifacts of Nazi plunder, but the memories and narratives encapsulated in the very earth they excavated. People recounted tales of ancestral tribulations, family heirlooms lost to the whims of tyranny, and during these excavations, testimony arose not only from survivors, but also from people who had lost entire generations to the Holocaust. Each stories told illuminated a thread of humanity. Each piece of recovered wealth echoed a deep-rooted suffering that could not merely be measured in gold. The varied response to these operations by local populations played into the narrative of post-war justice and restitution. While some communities showered the soldiers with gratitude and assistance, others viewed them through skeptical eyes, questioning why these foreign forces were now reclaiming what had been seized from their own hands. The ethical implications of recovery were vast, particularly given the fact that while some of the gold was earmarked for reparations, a significant portion would inevitably flow into the coffers of the victorious nations, leaving the citizens of the damned realm without a truly meaningful resolution. In the grander context of military strategy, the treasure hunt evolved into a dual mission: a search for wealth and an attempt to reconcile with the past. The intersection of military operations and post-conflict policing often led to blurred lines in terms of authority and motivation. Potent stories of betrayal emerged, as former Nazi collaborators found themselves caught in the crosshairs of Allied investigations. Their knowledge of hidden assets made them prime assets, or prime targets, in this complex retrieval mission. The tactics used by Allied forces mirrored those of the war, now with a different purpose: deploying covert operations to unearth secrets from reluctant informants, eager to deflect blame onto others as they navigated a tangled web of alliances, crafted under duress. As days turned into months and then years, the patience and persistence of those involved began to yield tangible results. Some treasure locations were indeed discovered, fabled caches hidden beneath the debris of war, entombed in vaults or masked by the verdant growth of post-war recovery. Yet, many of these efforts were inefficacious, leading to disappointment and disillusionment among the treasure seekers. The vast expanse of Europe, with its derelict infrastructure and ravitated landscapes, posed significant hurdles, making continued recovery missions demanding in terms of both manpower and resources. Seasonal weather variances would undermine their best-laid plans. The mud of the spring thaw made transport a fraught undertaking, while winter's grip encroached too soon on the endeavors. In certain cases, as treasure was recovered, allocative dilemmas emerged. What to do with the immense wealth? Disputes over rightful ownership arose even as some factions contended that the gold should be melted down and redistributed among victims of Nazi oppression. Others argued for its symbolic preservation, suggesting that the treasures serve as eternal reminders of human suffering and resilience. Thus, logistical teams sought to create frameworks for restitution that could account for the multifaceted layers of historical narratives, an exercise in noble ambition met with the harsh realities of a fragmented world. On a deeper level, the recovery of these treasures profoundly influenced the socio-political landscape of Europe, as war-torn nations began to shape their post-war identities around a new foundation of recovered wealth. This reality played into the broader discourse of reconciliation, as each bar of gold uncovered sparked dialogues around collective memory and the need for acknowledgement of atrocities committed in the shadows of history. Countries such as France, Belgium, and the Netherlands found themselves at the confluence of international scrutiny and local imperatives, tasked with balancing reparation with retribution. Ultimately, the hunt for the lost treasures of the Reich was far more than a search for mere gold. It became a metaphorical lens through which historians could examine the complexities of accountability and healing in post-war Europe. The physical recovery of wealth proved to be just as intertwined with psychological restoration, as societies struggled to reconcile the tangible with the intangible, the very essence of loss and redemption. The cadence of clinking coins often reverberated like a haunting melody through the memories of restless nights, underscoring a relentless quest for closure that stands as a testament to the human spirit, forever striving for justice amidst the ashes of its struggles. As World War II drew to a close, the intersection of military strategy and treasure recovery painted a complex portrait of desperation and urgency for Allied forces and European nations alike. In those final chaotic months of conflict, Allied soldiers became not only warriors but inadvertent treasure hunters, grappling with the massive quantities of gold, art, and valuables that the Nazi regime had amassed. This cultural loot was extracted from the very depths of occupied territories and often plundered from Jewish families and other victims of the brutal regime. The circumstances produced an intense pressure cooker environment where tactical decisions had ramifications far beyond the battlefield. In the dying days of the Reich, as the Allies encroached upon Berlin, intel regarding the whereabouts of these hidden treasures became frantically sought after. The most significant operations were initiated primarily by American and British intelligence. Teams, including the infamous Monuments Men, an elite cadre of art historians, museum curators, and a few military figures, were trained for a singular purpose: to locate and protect cultural artifacts from destruction. Their efforts underscored a pivotal theme of the period: the tension between military objectives and cultural preservation. As troops marched through German towns, they often faced a dual mandate: to secure strategic locations while simultaneously preserving invaluable art and artifacts that told the history of a civilization twisted by conflict. Intelligence reports suggested that the Nazis had resorted to elaborate concealment methods, stashing gold reserves in remote, clandestine vaults or burying it in the woods, far removed from prying eyes. A particularly daunting challenge emerged around the concept of operational security. The discovery of hidden treasures was paramount, However, so was ensuring that the broader objectives of dismantling the Nazi regime were not compromised. The interplay between these two facets commanded acute awareness and tactical ingenuity. Commanders faced the reality that while gold could fund rebuilding efforts, the immediate priority was dismantling the last vestiges of an oppressive regime, which would demand coordination between military action and recovery missions. As numerous Allied divisions pressed into German territories, the complexities of logistics became painfully evident. The sheer scope of the treasures involved meant that recovery could not simply involve frontline troops. A coordinated logistical network was critical for the safe transport and proper storage of any salvaged troves. To this end, the establishment of specialized units that were tasked solely with handling newly liberated treasures became indispensable. These units operated under precarious conditions, often vulnerable to the unpredictability of war, even while engaged in missions of recovery. Guerrilla fighters, remnants of the SS, and other factions willing to sabotage recovery efforts posed ongoing physical threats. In a notable instance, on May 17, 1945, American troops stationed near Merkers, Germany, stumbled upon a salt mine that housed millions in gold bars, luxury items, and priceless artworks. The event not only unveiled a trove of Nazi wealth, but also illuminated the chaotic nature of post-war decision-making processes. The gold amounted to around 8,000 bars, with untold amounts of cash and various art pieces seized by the Nazi regime. The trove offered an unprecedented opportunity for understanding the depth of Nazi looting, but amid such discovery was the arduous task of cataloging and attributing each item to its rightful owner, a process fraught with moral dilemmas and bureaucratic challenges. In terms of immediate military strategy, decisions regarding the allocation of recovered wealth became contentious. High-ranking officials often found themselves embroiled in passionate debates regarding the use of funds. While some advocated for reparations to be funneled into war-stricken communities, others suggested that these assets would be pivotal in the rebuilding of national infrastructures. The implications weighed heavily on post-war diplomacy, interweaving with larger discussions on justice and reparation, debates that reflected deeply entrenched societal wounds and rising calls for accountability. Nations once brought to their knees by the Nazi stranglehold now stood at an ethical crossroads, seeking both retribution and reconciliation. As the dust of war settled, the searching for Nazi gold also led to a rise in shady endeavors, spawning a veritable ecosystem of treasure hunters and scammers, driving some ex-soldiers into a murky world of illegal excavations and unregistered negotiations. Some independently pursued the prospect of wealth at any moral cost, often leading to frantic exhibitions of greed and betrayal. The anxiety surrounding lost treasures expanded, prompting numerous nations to launch formal investigations to recover laundered assets or undisclosed wealth. Embassies often acted as liaisons, negotiating with local authorities or embarking upon restoration projects designed to recover stolen treasures, while also managing their national narratives post-occupation. While the military juggernaut had disbanded state authority under Nazi control, the path to redistributing the immense wealth raised knotty questions regarding the power dynamics in the New World Order. Which nations would be first in line to establish claims? Would retribution eventually settle indebtedness or simply exacerbate suffering? Questions of equity loomed large, often revealing the fragility of a society attempting to move forward while grappling with the ghosts of the past. The simple act of recovering gold, once a mere trope of military success, now stood entwined with deep philosophical inquiries regarding collective memory. In the years following the war, countries like Austria and Switzerland navigated their positions in relation to the Nazi plundered wealth, as they had been both liberators and beneficiaries during the war. This complex discourse intertwined with the human reality of countless citizens who had lost loved ones and livelihoods. As these societies embarked on their paths of recovery, tales of lost treasures and their owners evolved into the foundations of new narratives, highlighting the resilience and artistry of those who survived the brutality of the regime. The revelations of unimaginable wealth, alongside the unspeakable grief of genocide, became central to their collective identities post-war. Overall, the hunt for Nazi gold after World War II serves as a poignant reflection of human endeavor against the backdrop of trauma and loss, marking an essential chapter in the aftermath of one of history's darkest periods. The technical intricacies of recovery operations, underlined by delicate human interactions, transitioned the narrative from mere gold-seeking expeditions into a comprehensive discourse around justice, memory, and healing, far beyond the material wealth reclaimed. This ongoing engagement with their past continues to shape Europe's socio-political landscape and collective consciousness, reflecting the enduring complexity of human nature amidst recovery and loss. The shadows of war resonate into the present, challenging generations to grapple with the legacies of their histories. In the immediate aftermath of World War II, as Allied forces stood victorious in the smoldering ruins of a divided Europe, the question of how to handle the vast quantities of looted wealth, including the infamous Nazi gold, arose almost as an oral echo of the battlefield chaos. The determination to recover this treasure, long considered a symbol of oppressive power, rapidly shifted the strategic conversations among the Allied powers, encompassing tactical considerations, diplomatic negotiations, and the all-too-human dimension of those directly affected by the devastation of war. Germany, a nation in tatters, was starkly divided between the burgeoning East, under Soviet influence, and the West, leaning towards democratic recovery models. As governments began to sift through the ashes of the Third Reich, the pressing urgency was ever apparent. Where did the Nazi gold go, and how could it ever be rightfully retrieved? From the outset, the logistics of unearthing this treasure posed a myriad of challenges. Compounded by the chaotic aftermath of the war, as cities lay in ruin, the gold was often buried under rubble, hidden away in clandestine vaults, or even transferred across borders to obscure storage locations in neighboring countries. Soldiers and civilians alike scoured landscapes not just for documents that might reveal clues, but also for boxes filled with gold bars or artistic treasures, meticulously catalogued by Nazi officials who had once declared it the spoils of war. Military units unearthed not only operational documents, but testimonies from individuals who had participated in or witnessed secret transportations, including the infamous route known as the Gold Train that was rumored to have wound through the Austrian and Czech countryside, a forgotten artery in Europe's post-war treasure map. Meanwhile, as countries crumbled financially, the discovery of this wealth became a topic of heated discussion among the victors. Switzerland, historically a neutral ground known for its banking fortitude, found itself under intense scrutiny. Accusations arose regarding its complicity in Nazi looting, as banks were suspected of harboring gold and valuables pilfered from Holocaust victims. The technical specificity of maintaining wealth in such tumultuous times, from secure storage facilities to procedural accountability, marked an entire discourse on ethically reclaiming stolen assets. As investigations commenced, financial institutions faced intense public pressure to recall their transactions with Nazi-linked accounts. Some bank executives even learned of the realities of using their vaults to safeguard gold that had traversed the continent in the hands of desperate war criminals. The situation turned dire as the Soviet Union and Western allies vied for control over Germany's economic future. The presence of gold became tangled in geopolitical strategies. The West, particularly the United States, perceived Nazi assets as vital resources for rebuilding the German economy. It was within this context that the rapidly evolving Marshall Plan started to take shape, intertwining the retrieval of these riches with broader economic recovery strategies. Yet, this offered a stark juxtaposition. The millions who had suffered the atrocities of the regime heard their suffering echo with each cabinet meeting, while countries initiated discussions around reparative justice. The complexities of possession and loss played out against the backdrop of political power games, as old structures of economic hegemony began to shift. Furthermore, The human impact of these negotiations often lay buried amid statistics and transactions. Families torn apart by loss began to mobilize, demanding reparations and accountability from those who had benefited from their suffering. One notable case was that of a group of former Jewish prisoners who banded together, documenting their losses diligently while seeking justice. Their narratives became intertwined with the broader discourse on the Holocaust, revealing the emotional and psychological scars of the genocide. The legal complexities involved were staggering, with each country wielding its own laws and policies regarding the restitution of stolen properties, leading to extensive, often arduous, bureaucratic battles. As these individuals fought for recognition under the shadow of political maneuvering, the narratives surrounding Nazi gold took a deeply personal turn, underscoring the intersection of wealth, trauma, and the quest for identity amid displacement. As time progressed and the hunt for Nazi gold morphed from clandestine undertakings to overt geopolitics, the interplay between discovery and concealment seemed to fuel a voracious demand for evidence. The emergence of expert-led teams tasked with investigating potential locations for hidden wealth represented not just the pursuit of material assets, but also a societal yearning for catharsis. Archaeologists, historians, military strategists, and even treasure hunters joined the fray. Each expedition wove a complex tapestry of expected and unexpected outcomes, revealing treasures not merely in gold but in history, uncovering the stories behind the artifacts as they emerged from obscurity. The painful realities of recovery operations were also enmeshed with the challenges faced when it came to international diplomacy. Nations engaged in a hedging game of information exchange, often withholding pivotal intelligence out of fear of losing their claim to the treasures unearthed. The international landscape often resembled a double-edged sword, where the pursuit of Nazi loot was juxtaposed against the urgent need for reparative justice encompassing Holocaust survivors and their descendants. This created a maelstrom of intricate balances. Countries such as France and the United Kingdom found themselves at times adversaries with each other, vying to retrieve as much fiscal restitution as possible from the remnants of the regime while grappling with their historical roles as combatants against Nazism. Ultimately, while the discovery of Nazi gold and treasures served a practical purpose, it also became emblematic of the ongoing struggle to cultivate a society that could reckon with its past. The pursuit for riches became, paradoxically, a key narrative in honoring those who had suffered under the regime. Gold bars unearthed from underneath old banking structures or hidden in abandoned forests unleashed waves of public interest, but also led people to reflect on the broader question of what such wealth implied. This golden legacy begged the question, who truly benefits from its recovery? Recouped gold, however glittering, was undeniably tainted by the horrors of its origin. In the years that followed the war, the remnants of Nazi gold traveled alongside the spectral echoes of memory. Its pursuit stood as both a reality and a metaphor for the complex tapestry of grief, restitution, and healing. The overarching narrative of recovery, steeped in tactical resolution, also continued to serve as a cautionary tale regarding humanity's tendencies to forget, overshadowed by the lust for wealth. As nations worked to redefine themselves, both economically and morally, the discussions surrounding Nazi gold would echo through generations, primarily shaping Europe's approach to reconciliation and remembrance. As the dust settled over the smoldering remains of cities, villages, and lives shattered by the Second World War, whispers of the vast fortune that had accompanied the Nazi regime began to circulate in the aftermath. The crucial years following the surrender of the German forces in May 1945 were not just a time of rebuilding, but also a period of intense scrutiny surrounding the reported hoards of gold, art, and priceless artifacts believed to have been amassed through theft and oppression. While Allied forces celebrated the collapse of the Third Reich, they simultaneously confronted a tangled web of logistical and ethical dilemmas. Who should be responsible for the recovery, distribution, and restitution of these haunted treasures? The task at hand involved navigating a treacherous landscape riddled with political rivalries and ideological tensions. Allied leaders, including the United States, the United Kingdom, France, and the Soviet Union, encountered not merely the remnants of a defeated military force, but also the heavy legacy of greed and betrayal that marked their struggle. In this struggle, the whereabouts of Nazi gold soon became a focus of attention, particularly as different factions sought to recover not just wealth, but also knowledge hidden within this cargo, a record of illicit activities that encompassed the horrors of the Holocaust. Initially, the U.S. military's intelligence offices, eager to capitalize on any financial resources, began the meticulous process of gathering reports from local German populations. Enforced through an investigative apparatus, these reports pointed to possible sites where Nazi treasures might be hidden. Tanks and armored vehicles scoured the Rhineland as soldiers turned their hands to excavating what they had come to regard as treasure. The hunt included high-stakes forays into underground bunkers suspected of storing gold bars, silver, and other valuables, while military planners scanned maps for any clues about elongated supply routes used during the war. The rapid territorial advances of the Allies meant that time was of the essence. The Soviets, in particular, were keen to acquire as much of this wealth as they could, an embodiment of their own narrative of liberation. By the time they reached Berlin, they were driven not only by the desire for conquest, but by the equally potent ambition of reclamation. However, the physical act of recovering the gold was only half the battle. The myriad of challenges facing military decision-makers often overshadowed these exhilarating escapades. Tracking the gold required deft political maneuverings as much as military might. Reports from various liberated territories indicated that Nazi gold had not only been stored in banks, but was also rumored to lie buried in the countryside, swallowed by forests or concealed beneath the stones of dilapidated castles. The imperative to recover the treasures quickly collided with the reality of a country in turmoil. In many situations, cultural artifacts once displayed in grandiose German institutions had simply vanished from sight, and local Germans were often hostile, reluctant to assist in any efforts to unearth their neighbors' historical misdeeds. Most notably, one of the biggest logistical challenges emerged when Allied forces unearthed a cache deep within a mine in the Bavarian Alps, where notorious leaders of the Nazi regime had believed they could retreat. Soldiers soon faced the harsh realities of mining: dangerous conditions, unstable tunnels, and the constant specter of deception, as information extracted from local sources proved to be unreliable. Moreover, there was an intrinsic human cost to the recapture mission. The men tasked with these excavations were not merely soldiers seeking treasure. They were human beings grappling with the trauma etched into their own experiences. Each bar of gold they unearthed whispered the names of those who had perished from the oppression that it symbolized. The psychological weight of their task could be overwhelming, forcing many to reflect on their roles as liberators in a world still afflicted by hatred and suspicion. The treasure hunt thus soon morphed into a tactical battle grounded in morality. As the Allies wrestled with their unwelcome ghosts, new intelligence hinted at the potential for gold buried in East Germany, a future battleground for ideological supremacy. The Soviets, resolute in their commitments, focused on establishing dominance over this treasure-laden region, rallied by their motivations that aligned more closely with Marxist principles, capturing the spoils not as personal wealth, but as national assets. The intersection of military action and economic desire intensified, as political leaders recognized that economic leverage would be a centerpiece in post-war reconstruction. The narratives advanced by disparate forces showcased the increasing complexities of the conflict, infused with zeal and often marred by human exploitation. Amidst the fervor of material pursuit, claims to restitution arose. Countries across Europe clamored for a piece of the proverbial pie, adopting a legalistic framework that sought to address historical grievances of empires and nations alike. While France pushed for the return of art plundered from Jewish families, the Netherlands demanded compensation for colonial enterprises intertwined with the war's fabric. The post-war defense and enforcement of legal claims often devolved into strategic negotiations and, in rare instances, violent confrontations. Gold, once a means to power and oppression, transformed into a platform for healing, reconciliation, and yet further discord. Public reactions played an equally complicated role. For ordinary citizens who had endured apocalyptic destruction and witnessed unbearable suffering, the quest for Nazi gold took on a different hue. In some communities, a fragmented sense of justice prompted individuals to voice their desperation, not just for restitution, but for recognition of their pain. News of gold discoveries incited emotions that ran the gamut from exhilaration to disillusionment. For many felt that wealth recovered could never outweigh the human cost the regime had exacted. Families who had lived in the shadow of persecution knew too well the stakes of a narrative woven with gold, a heavy burden against which no amount could ever counterbalance the past's traumas. The fascinating duality of wealth, an exhilarating sense of economic promise intertwined with an ever-present conscience of its implications, served as the backdrop of this tumultuous chapter. As months morphed into years, the issue of Nazi gold moved beyond a quest for treasure. It evolved into an emblem of collective reckoning. The riches of the Reich became not only a valuable resource, but an ongoing saga illustrating the arduous journeys of memory, justice, and humanity's unending struggle to reclaim agency over its history, fraught with complexities that would reverberate into the future. The world learned that while treasures may be unearthed, the true wealth lies in the narratives carrying the lessons of yesterday, a nuanced interplay that underscored both healing and deepening the chasms birthed from conflict. Thus the legacy of Nazi gold endured, not as mere artifacts of human greed, but as bittersweet reminders of lives irrevocably altered, a haunting tension etched into the contours of history itself. As the cessation of hostilities teetered on the horizon in mid-1945, the world grappled with the aftermath of the cataclysm known as the Second World War. A colossal power vacuum emerged as the Axis powers crumbled. Within it lay a tangled web of resentments, unfulfilled promises, and historical wounds. The Nazis, notorious for their obsession with wealth accumulation, had systematically plundered nations across Europe, stockpiling gold, artifacts, and looted riches that would become a focal point in the emergent post-war landscape. The trail of their ill-gotten gains led not only to hidden caches in remote alpine retreats or concealed below the rubble of bombed-out cities, but also into the chaotic confusion wrought by wartime displacement and the moral quandaries of exploiting such capital. As the Allied forces began their arduous task of dismantling Nazi infrastructure, they were met with a monumental challenge: reconciling the overwhelming human cost of the regime's ambitions with the tantalizing remnants of the wealth they had amassed. Amid this turmoil, the Allied forces marshaled an immense wealth of resources aimed at tracking down the gold before it could vanish entirely into oblivion. Intelligence units, including the U.S. Treasury's Office of Strategic Services, OSS, and British military intelligence, initiated comprehensive investigations into potential hiding spots. They understood that the Nazi gold had become a commodity that could be leveraged for reparations, building a framework for future economic stability. However, these efforts quickly morphed into a daunting endeavor due to the vast territories involved and the secrets clamoring to evade exposure. The cursory reports of precious metals looted from Jews, as well as the artifacts stolen from occupied nations, formed a patchwork of leads that proved as elusive as they were tantalizing. It was not simply a matter of retrieving valuables. It became a race against time, as many within the European citizenry themselves grappled with the reality that this wealth could either serve to rebuild or to sow further discontent. High-ranking politicians and military officials recognized the importance of handling the treasure with a strategy that would foster goodwill among the war-torn nations. They meticulously plotted the allocation of any recovered wealth, with the hope that redressing the financial imbalances created by Nazi theft could facilitate healing and perhaps a burgeoning unity within a fractured Europe. Yet within this idealistic framework lay a grim tension. The logistical realities involved in establishing accountability demanded that meticulous records be maintained, as conventional financial networks lay in ruin, exacerbated by shortages and rampant inflation. As nations struggled to rebuild their economies, the narrative of gold became interwoven with geopolitical maneuvering, creating contention where there once existed a potential for cooperation. The gold question, as it unfolded, became a harsh reminder of the atrocities committed under the guise of military conquest. Jacked-up prices and social unrest simmered throughout Europe, transforming any potential for a smooth transition into a fraught battleground of its own. Every unearthed treasure was also a bond for the communities devastated by its theft, as echoes of the past resurrected painful memories, intensifying the already complex social and political dynamics that surrounded the post-war effort. Allied leaders recognized the conundrum. While the Entente struggled with the visible scars of war and loss, their efforts to reconcile such historical injustices sometimes resulted in a counterproductive obsession with cold, hard cash, when the focus should have been on restitution and recompense for human suffering. Moreover, the military tactics employed to facilitate these initiatives were nothing short of strategic ingenuity mixed with desperation. Each recovery operation relied upon not just brute force, but a steadily growing network of informants and locals who were often tormented by memories of trauma. The locals, in navigating a fractured landscape overwhelmed by the devastation of war, found themselves drawn into morally ambiguous terrain. On one hand, they recognized the potential benefits that could be derived from turning over leads on hidden caches. On the other, they were painfully aware that such treasures were often the vestiges of loved ones lost, a reflection of hope extinguished. Thus, in this chaotic milieu, heroes and traitors alike emerged, as motivations blended with visceral reactions born of grief and survival instincts. The human dramas associated with these treasure hunts were, in many cases, just as compelling as the search for the gold itself. Captured enemy combatants and civilians suspected of harboring knowledge became unwitting participants in the Allied efforts, often subjected to harsh interrogations or coerced into insinuating others for personal gain. In such an environment, trust was a scarce currency. Those tasked with extracting information frequently found themselves navigating cross-cultural sensitivities, while simultaneously heeding the imperative of national security. Various factions, the former resistance fighters, the remnants of Nazi sympathizers and loyalists, and the everyday citizenry, often further complicated negotiations surrounding any disclosed locations of wealth. Each group not only bore personal scars from the war, but had also formed their expectations for how newly recovered treasures should be allocated. It was during this anarchy that rumors circulated, drawing underground networks into the fray, each seeking to capitalize on both the fear of impending reprisals and the tantalizing promise of unimaginable wealth. Opportunistic treasure hunters, emboldened by the prevailing chaos, began to scour farmlands, mountains, and the ruins of urban landscapes, driven by both desperation and dreams of fortune. However, this influx of zeal often undermined the painstaking investigative work being performed by official investigators, leading to further complications as legitimate recovery missions raced against a backdrop of violent confrontations that erupted where stakes were particularly high. Juxtaposed against these endeavors were the haunting specters of those who had suffered, the displaced, the bereaved, and the survivors of the camps. For many, the gold represented an affront, an unwilling testament to their grief, an emblem of their annihilation, distorted into opportunities for monetary gain that seemed unworthy in light of human suffering. While some viewed the recovered Nazi wealth as potential reparations for their historic losses, others believed that the true value of what had been lost could never be quantified through currency. This led to profound debates that echoed through reconciliation processes aimed at addressing the historical realities of wartime atrocities. Thus unfolded a complex tapestry of ambition, morality, and historical accountability, woven through the discord of a continent on fire. Amid the search for Nazi gold, the wounds of history became clearer, a sobering reminder that the shadows of the past are not so easily cast away, mere decades after the most brutal human conflict the world had ever known. The hunt for lost treasure became the lens through which society confronted its collective guilt and paradoxes, forcing future generations to scrutinize the price of their legacy against a backdrop of profound loss. As the dust settled on these tumultuous years, that legacy would serve not only as a financial ledger of the past, but as a narrative that would shape the moral landscape of a continent poised for reconstruction.